Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Compression Masterclass. We are starting just a little bit early. I just want to make sure that everyone is able to get in here, is able to kind of like get seated, get ready, get the drinks, get their popcorn, whatever. Let's make sure you can actually see me right now. You're just seeing this little screen. Let me pop me up. There I am. Hi. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dylan Pines. I am a professional producer, and I am just basically here to teach you everything there is to know about, well, specifically, I want to teach you my technique for using compression, and that is the peak and valley technique. But before we get started, we're not going to get started for the next 10 minutes or so. I want everybody in the comments, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from. We got a lot of people who are from all over the world who registered for this. It's honestly crazy. So yeah, let us know in the comments where you're from. I'd love to shout you out, and we'll get going. Well, while we are waiting for everybody to get in here, I'm actually going to pop our little, here we go. I'm going to pop our little image back up on screen just to get a few preparations on my side ready to go. All right, we've got a few people who are in the chat. Looks like we've got, and I'm so sorry if I mispronounce any of these. We've got Reinfried from Germany, close to Erlangen. We have got Mike, who's a bass player from England. We've got German, who's from Chile, which is a wonderful name to be named German and be from Chile. I love that. We have got Eric from Las Vegas. Hello, Eric. Down here in the USA, just like myself. I'm down in Nashville, Tennessee myself. We've got Barry from Auburn, California. Hello, Barry. Glad to see you. We have got, who else do we have? We've got Peter from the Netherlands. Hey, Peter, how's it going? Like myself, I'm down in. So unfortunately, I'm having kind of some technical issues on my side with YouTube. So my chat is kind of freezing up just for the moment. So I'm going to try to see if I can fix that before we get started, just so that I can see everyone who's here, get some shout outs going. So if I'm gone just for a moment, I will be right back. Ah, there you go. Okay, we are good. We're back up. We're fixed. I want to show my face again because now we've got that fixed up. Okay, let's shout out some more people. God, I'm so excited to just meet all of you. It's wild how many people are here from all over the world. We have got Seth from New Jersey. We have got Pat from Vancouver. We've got Bobby from Kansas playing the keyboards, the drums, the guitar, and the bass. Multi-instrumentalist. I'm impressed. We've got Nathaniel from Indonesia. Oh, fantastic. We have, let's see. We've got Preschool Fight Club from up in the East Coast. Good to see you. We've got Dekrans. Again, so sorry if I'm mispronouncing. From Stockholm. This is incredible. Just people from all over the world. It's so great to meet all of you. We've got Mike Cullen from Scotland. Hello, Mike. We've got Juan from Colombia. How's it going? We have Wind Clang. I believe I'm pronouncing that right, but from I think Switzerland. They said I am Swiss. I'm assuming that means you're from Switzerland. So great to meet you. We've got Lolo from South Africa. We're on, I think, every continent at this point. Except I guess no one on Australia, no one in, obviously, Antarctica. Let's keep on looking around. Oh, we've got a few people from India. We've got Jermaine from Dubai. We've got we've got Josh from Cape Town, South Africa. Man, there are a lot of people here from the Netherlands. That's great. Whole lot of South Americans. Ah, great. Mel is here. Mel is from Australia. We have it. We have every continent. I feel bad. I'm having to go back to like my grade school days to go through my continents and make sure that that's all of them. North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia. Yep, that's all of them. God, that is just so dang exciting. I hope all of you are excited. Again, if you're just showing up, my name is Dylan Pines. Rob is in the comments. Actually, he's going to be moderating the comments throughout this entire session. We're going to be going over the peak and valley technique for compression. But we're going to keep on rolling. I want to keep shouting you guys out. But first, I do want to let all of you know, we are going to be going over a lot of content in this. Content that, I want to make sure I'm respecting your time. I don't want to take just forever to try to teach you all of this stuff, but I'm going to be teaching you a lot. So it'd be best if you remove distractions, if you grab a notebook, you get a glass of water or whatever your beverage of choice is, and buckle down because we're going to be going pretty fast once we get started. I will say, stick around for the end of the live stream because we're going to be doing a Q&A. I'm going to be reading off some of your comments and answering them. And there's going to be something very, very special for those who stick around to the end of this webinar. Let me shout out a few more people. God, this is incredible. We've got Paul from Waco, Texas. My best friend lives in Waco. I love your city. It's a good city. We've got Voice of the, I can't pronounce that last word, so I'm just going to say Voice. We've got Voice from British Columbia. We've got Jones, or again, I'm probably mispronouncing that, but from Finland. Great to see you. We have we've got Audrey from Russia, from Moscow. Fantastic. Okay, so we are going to get started like I just said, get rid of any distractions, grab a notebook, because we're going to kind of just run straight into it. We are going to be covering the peak and valley technique. Now, this is my own personal technique for how I do compression, but it's something that a lot of professionals use. We have just, at Musician on Mission, we have systematized it. We've created a workflow that is hopefully going to allow you to maybe understand how to actually do compression for the first time and understand what's going on behind the scenes. The number one thing that you're going to learn from this webinar, you're going to learn a lot of things, but the number one thing, the threshold is more important than you think it is. And the threshold is going to determine so much about the tone of your compressor. By the end of this, that's going to get drilled into your head, but you're also going to learn about dynamic ranges and why dynamic range probably isn't what you think it is, and why what a compressor does probably is not what you think it is as well. And you're going to learn 3 techniques of how to get different sounds with a compressor to kind of achieve different goals, things that pros use in every single mix that you hear on the radio. That's what we are going to be covering. And right now, I'd say it's probably time for us to just get started. Let's jump straight in. So, the first thing I want to talk about before we get into anything else talking about compression, let's talk about what the dynamic range is. Because what you hear all the time is that, the point of a compressor is to, quote unquote, control the dynamic range. Well, a lot of people actually say it's to make that dynamic range smaller. That's not necessarily true. We'll learn about why that is in a little bit. But the point is to control the dynamic range. But you would be asking yourself, well, what is the dynamic range? So most of you, I would assume, are musicians. And as musicians, it gets drilled into our heads that dynamic range is the difference between the loudest part of the song and the quietest part of the song, right? Not necessarily true, actually. There are 3 different kinds of dynamic ranges, and knowing and understanding all 3 is going to be huge for you understanding what a compressor is actually doing to the instrument you're trying to compress. So, 3 different types of dynamic ranges. The first is musical dynamic range. So that is pretty much exactly what we just said. It is the difference between the loudest and the quietest moment of the entire song. It's the shape of the song, if you want to call it that. This is the part that's really, really creative. The person who's writing the song is the person who is thinking, okay, I want the verses to be this loud and the choruses to be this loud and the bridge to be this loud and so on and so forth. We don't really use compressors to deal with that. That's purely based on musicality. That's purely based on, volume automation and balancing, how loud you decided to track all the instruments, stuff like that. But there are 2 other types of dynamic ranges that we do control with a compressor. So the next dynamic range is the macro dynamic range. And that's basically the difference between the loudest and the quietest moment of an instrument's performance. So we've got musical dynamic range, it's the loudest and quietest moment of the song, and macro dynamic range, which is the loudest and quietest moment of the entire instrument's performance. Now, this is important because not every single instrument has the same macro dynamic range. There might be certain instruments that play really loud at a certain moment of the song and then play quieter, and then other instruments that play loud the whole time, but maybe there's a few notes that are really quiet, or vice versa. This is the part where it comes down to the literal performance of the person playing the instrument. That is what determines macro dynamic range. Our final dynamic range is micro dynamic range. And that is just basically using a magnifying glass and going even more specific. That is the difference between the loudest moment and the quietest moment of each note. Okay? So if the musical dynamic range is the shape of the song, If macro dynamic range is the shape of the performance, then microdynamic range is the shape of the note. That's also known as the volume envelope, which we'll get into in just a moment. Some of you might have heard that term before. A lot of you might be really confused what it is, what it has to do with compression. So let me show you just here in the DAW kind of what I'm talking about. Well, I obviously do not have an example of musical dynamic range. That's just because, I mean, if you've done any mixing, you've seen it. You've put in, maybe an entire song, an entire mix, and you're able to see sort of just the general ebb and flow of the song. You're able to see which parts are quieter, which parts are louder, whatever. But let me show you some examples of macro dynamic range. So let's look at this electric guitar right here. So this is the entire performance of this guitar. Now, it's a pretty soft performance for the most part, but there are a few notes that are very, very, very loud. Let me actually play this for you. Turn that off. So there's just a few moments where it really pops out, and then there's a few moments where it gets really quiet. Now, that might be what they were intending. That might be a mistake. It doesn't really matter. This is what macro dynamic range is. It is the difference between this note, this super loud note, and we'll say this note right here, this very quiet note. So I would say this has a very wide macro dynamic range. Whereas let's look at this distorted electric guitar. Now the macro dynamics of this are very, very small. The difference between the loudest moment, maybe here, and the quietest moment, maybe here, is very, very small. It's a very small macro dynamic range. So I'll play this, and you'll be able to hear what I'm talking about. And that's not inherently a good or a bad thing. It's neutral. It's just something that is important to know once we start to talk about the compressor. So now let's look at microdynamic range, which is the shape of the note. So let me, what's a good example of this? Let's go to our snare. So this is the shape of the note. There is a difference between the loudest moment of the note right here and the quietest moment, down here. And every single snare drum, you'll see, follows that same pattern. And here's a point that I want to make about microdynamic range. So, I was using this word known as volume envelope before, and I want to explain what that means. The volume envelope, it's basically the pattern of loudness that is made by all sounds in nature. And I don't necessarily mean that, every sound that's made in nature, that's made naturally, has the exact same volume envelope. I really just mean that everything sort of follows the same norms. Everything has the same sections in their volume envelope. And so when I say volume envelope, what I mean is basically, if I was to draw a line, let's say, around this, the volume envelope of this snare, if I was to draw a line, it would be, down here, and then it would be really loud, and then it would slowly taper off. That shape, kind of like that spike and then that taper off, is the volume envelope. It is how loud something is at every single moment of, basically that instrument or, that thing in nature being created. And here's why this is important. For the most part, every instrument has a fairly set volume envelope. The macro dynamics can be pretty inconsistent. You can play a note super loud, you can play a note super quiet. It just depends on how you, the performer, decide to perform it. But the microdynamic range, that is a little bit more set in stone. that is entirely dependent on, the properties of the instrument, how the acoustic guitar is made, what head you put on the snare, maybe what amplifier or what pedals you're going through in your bass or your electric guitar. Or if you're using a synthesizer, it's literally how you set up your volume envelope, because a lot of synthesizers have what's known as the ADSR curve in the synth. That's just the volume envelope. It's the exact same thing with a different name. So by knowing that it's pretty much always the same, we can use and abuse that with compression. But I'm going to get to that in a little bit. The first thing I want to talk about right now is I want to talk about the two parts of the volume envelope, because by knowing the two different parts of the volume envelope, we are able to dramatically change how we do compression. And for the first time, maybe do compression with intention. Actually know what sound we are wanting to get before we even touch the compressor. And here are the two parts of the volume envelope. Now, really, there's like four. Some people even say there's five. For the sake of this argument and for the sake of compression, we are going to simplify it down to two parts. And that is the peak and the valley. Now, that might sound familiar because that's something that I've been saying during the intro of this live stream. You've probably read it on some of the emails. The peak and valley technique. We are going to be basing our compression around these two parts of the volume envelope. And I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to literally imagine a mountain range. Now, for some of you, that's probably very easy. For example, whoever we were talking about that was living in Switzerland, you might live next to one. And whoever we were talking to who lives in Arizona, good luck. Although actually, I think Arizona does have mountains. It doesn't matter. But I want you to sit and imagine a mountain range. And I want you to imagine the peaks of those mountains and how those peaks gradually slope down until it gets to the flat portion, which is the valleys. Mountains always have valleys. It's those spaces in between each mountain. That's kind of what we're talking about here. So we have two specific parts of every single sound wave. This is the peak, which is this loud moment right here. Some people call it the transient. It's kind of the moment, it's the moment where the most energy happens. If I have an acoustic guitar and I use a pick and I pluck the string, the moment that string pluck, basically hits the string and the string begins to vibrate, it's the most energy it's ever going to have, right? That's basically what is starting, it's starting the sound. For those of you who have, mowed your lawn, you might have had what's known as a primer on the side of your mower. Something that shoots gas into the engine to help it kind of start up. That's basically what this is. It's like an initial moment of extreme vibration energy to actually help to create the sound. Functionally, it's friction. It's something hitting something else. That's how all sound is created. It's something hitting something else. For an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar, it's the pick hitting the string. For a drum set, it's, the stick hitting the drum. For a singer, it's our vocal folds hitting together, hitting each other. If I was to snap, it is my finger hitting the palm of my hand. For literally anything. I mean, I could keep going. I'm not going to. For the sound of a wave, it's the sound of water droplets hitting other water droplets. For the sound of a piano, it is the sound of a mallet, hitting the actual strings inside of the piano. So that initial explosion of energy, that is our peak. That's our transient. Now, the rest of the note, this section right here, that is our valley. That is the bulk of the note. It's where the tone of the note lives. It's where the color of the note lives. It's where the loudness of the note often lives. It is really what we as humans think of as the sound. We struggle to hear transients because they're so fast. The peaks are really, really quick. Now, they change dramatically what a song or what a sound feels like. But this is the part we really hear, this valley. Now, a lot of other people, if you're familiar with the volume envelope, they call it the sustain. That's another word for it. But just to review, we've got our peaks, we've got our valleys. And let me show you another example, because these are in everything. So like here's a bass guitar. Now check out what we've got. We've got our peak right here, and we've got our valley, where it slowly loses energy. And the valley lasts basically until either another peak is created, like if you're in a mountain range, for example, or if the note runs out of vibration energy. You know, the sound wave has no more energy to continue to move, to continue to vibrate, and, you know, the note just stops. Or, you know, we let go of the note. If we are playing a particular instrument, maybe a piano or a bass, if we let go, obviously, that's the end of the valley. Like, let's look at another example. Let's check out these vocals right here. Now, vocals are really interesting because there are still peaks and valleys in them, but vocals are extremely dynamic. They have very, very variable, that was a very fun thing to say, very, very variable dynamics just because of how much we can change the shape of our mouth, the shape of our throat, the shape of our tongue, and how we are hitting our vocal cords. You know, an acoustic guitar can't do that. There's only so many ways you can pluck a string. You know, and the string is going to vibrate the same no matter what, depending on where you have your finger, you know, on the actual fretboard. But you'll still be able to see, might not be quite as aggressive, but we've still got a peak here. We've still got our loud point, and it still goes down a little bit. And then this particular singer decides to start another note right here. It's another peak, and then very quickly decided to die down. Or like, let's go over here. We've got right here, we've got our peak, our loud moment. It starts to die down. The vocalist gives it a little bit more energy to kind of continue the note a little bit more, and then it dies down until the vocalist begins to start the next note. So, peaks, valleys. I'm going to say it one more time just to really make sure that you get it in your head. Peaks and valleys. That is what almost every single sound is created. Or excuse me, almost what every single sound has in its creation. Now, one, somewhat important exception is synthesizers. Now, synthesizers generally do have peaks and valleys, but they are technically not sounds made by nature. They're sounds that are made via technology, via computers. You know, for the most part, big asterisk. I know that there's a lot of arguments that could be made for certain synthesizers that that's not the case. But, you can sometimes like take out the peak entirely, take out the valley entirely. So we're not necessarily going to be getting into that argument of, you know, whether that is true every single time. But for the most part, synthesizers also have peaks and they also have valleys. So I want to talk about what we are trying to control with our compressors. Now, I said before, there's three types of dynamic ranges. There is musical dynamics, macro dynamics, microdynamics. So with a compressor, we are trying to control either, that's important, either the macro dynamics, you know, the shape of an instrument's performance, or the microdynamics, the shape of an instrument's note. And there's a very important distinction between those two. And we're going to go over some styles of compression that use and abuse both of those types of dynamic ranges, but I want to talk just a little bit of theory before we do that. If I was using a compressor, right, and I wanted to compress the macro dynamic range, you know, thinking back to what most people say compression is for, you know, which is, as they say, turning the loud sounds down, turning the quiet sounds up. You've heard that a bazillion times. That is really what we're actually trying to do whenever we're targeting the macro dynamics. We are trying to turn the loud notes. I have an ant on my arm. Go away. break my flow. Oh, I'm so sorry. Shoot. Oh, Ant, you distracted me. Whenever we're working with the macro dynamics, we are trying to turn down the loud notes so that the performance of the instrument is more consistent. That's really what we're going for. We're going for consistency. But if I was wanting to target the micro dynamics, well, I really have two options. I can either make the peaks louder, or I can make the valleys louder. Or you could also say make the peaks quieter or the valleys quieter, but functionally it ends up being, do you want to make the peaks louder or do you want to make the valleys louder? Now, by doing that, we are fundamentally changing the volume envelope of that entire instrument. We're not leveling out the performance anymore. We are physically changing the tone of the instrument. We are changing how the acoustics, the acoustics of the room and the acoustics of that particular instrument caused that instrument to have that specific volume envelope. We're messing with that. Which means if we're wanting to target microdynamics, we aren't wanting to create consistency, we are wanting to change the tone. So whenever you hear people talking about compression, where they're like, oh, I want to change the tone to sound more punchy, or I want it to sound more thick, that's what they're talking about. They are talking about changing the volume envelope. They are either turning up the peaks and down the valleys, or they are turning up the valleys and down the peaks. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So let's look at this first. So obviously the snare has super, super high peaks, very, very low valleys. Now, if I were to play this, and it's going to sound exactly like you think it would sound, it's very punchy. It's very in your face. It's very short. The transient, that peak, has a lot of energy, so it hits you in the chest, and then it's gone. So it's just that like, pa, very poppy. Pa. So that's what it sounds like when you have really high peaks, really low valleys. Now on the flip side, let's go back to this electric guitar over here. Now we were talking about this before. This thing has peaks and valleys that are almost the same level. You know, rather than having super high peaks, super low valleys like the snare did, this has peaks that are just barely louder than the valleys. They're almost the exact same level. And that gives it this thick sound, the sound that we go for with a lot of distorted guitars. It's super thick, it's super loud. It's very in your face. Play it real quick. You don't hear that like boom, boom on your chest, but you just hear bigness, right? So we can use a compressor to create those two different styles of compression. We can create those two different tones. So those are actually the three different styles of compression that we are going to be covering today. We are going to be covering consistent style of compression, which is where you are targeting the macro dynamics. You're wanting to level out the performance. We're going to be going over punchy compression, which is the style where we are trying to turn down the valleys and turn up the peaks to get that very punchy sound, kind of like the snare had. And we are going to be learning thickness style of compression, where we are trying to turn up the valleys and turn down the peaks to get that thick, aggressive, loud sound like we're getting from this electric guitar. So let's start off. I kind of want to start off rather than by showing you how to do this stuff on the compressor. I really don't think that's going to do a lot of good if you just kind of learn tips and tricks. Tips and tricks are fine. I'm not saying they're bad, but I want you to understand why these combinations of sounds, or these combinations of settings, on the compressor, why they do what they do. So I'm going to bring up one of my absolute favorite tools with learning compression. And that is the Audio Compression Visualizer. This thing is amazing. If you do nothing after this, this webinar, just go to this URL. It's free. It's just something that some programmer made. And basically, it just shows you what is happening with different compression settings. So we've got three different things on here. We've got our green waveform, which is the original waveform. We have our blue waveform, which is the compressed waveform. And we've got what I call the red blob. And this is just showing us how much gain reduction we're actually getting. Okay, now the cool thing about this is that as I change this, you can actually see what is happening to the waveform as I do it. So you're going to be able to see how to actually create these different styles of compression, and you're going to understand visually what is happening to the waveform so that you can go and do these things with intention. Because ultimately, that's how you become good at compression. It's knowing what is happening when you're doing every single move, and then knowing, okay, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to level out, the macro dynamics of this performance? Am I trying to make this this instrument more punchy? Am I trying to make this instrument thicker? There's a lot of other things I could do. We're just going to stick with those three for this webinar, just because we've got limited time. So obviously, we've got the kind of like the 5 main parts of any compressor. Now, there are definitely exceptions with a lot of analog compressors. Some of them don't have attack and release, or some don't have ratio, or some don't have some don't have threshold. There's tons of different exceptions, but most digital compressors, like the ones that come stock with your DAW, are going to have these 5 things: threshold, ratio, attack, release, and makeup. And depending on how, what combination you have of these 5 different settings is going to change what the compressor is actually doing to the waveform. This is important to know. It's not just, I want to get the attack around 10 milliseconds. I want to get the release around 100 milliseconds. And I just want to move the threshold and ratio around until I'm getting the amount of gain reduction I want. That's absolutely what you should not be doing. Now, that is also absolutely what everybody does when they learn how to do compression for the first time. It's what I did for years. But when you're doing that, you're just sort of twiddling knobs and waiting for it to sound good. And a lot of times it doesn't end up actually sounding good. It's just that you added compression and, to your head, you're like, oh, it must be better because I added compression. So let's really quickly just review what each of these things do, just for anyone on here who's a beginner, who maybe needs a quick refresher before I get into the actual advanced stuff. So first off, we have our threshold, and it's the thing that I said earlier in this webinar that was so important, way more important than you think it is. So the threshold, it's this gray line right here that you can see. And as I'm turning it down, you can see the entire waveform is going down. As I'm turning it up, the waveform is going up. So the threshold is basically the volume level where the compressor kicks on. So if the threshold is set at, let's say, negative 10 decibels, then whenever the guitar or the drums, or whatever instrument, whenever that instrument becomes louder than 10 dBs, the compressor turns on, right? So that said, where you set the threshold is really important. Do you want to set it to where only the peaks trigger it? Or do you want to set it to where only the valleys trigger it? Ooh, there's a little preview to how we create different styles of compression. So next up, we have our ratio. Now, the ratio is really just saying how aggressive do you want the compression to be. The ratio, to me, is the least important control out of all of these 5 controls. Now, that's my hot take. A lot of people don't agree with me on that. The ratio should be the thing that you do last whenever you're setting up your compressor, because the ratio is you just kind of getting the amount of control right, the amount of squash right, it's not actually going to get you the sound you're looking for. Threshold, attack, release, and makeup gain a little bit, those are the things that are going to get you the sound that you're looking for. So you can see, as I turn the ratio up, this blue waveform gets quieter. And as I turn it down, it gets louder. And that's just because the compressor is basically just saying, okay, I want to turn down the volume of this particular sound to where it is closer to the threshold line. You know, if I have a ratio that's basically limiting, so we'll say 100, and let's just do this. You know, it has basically limited this to where it has not let it get any louder than this threshold line, right? So that's basically what we're doing. We are setting where we want the compressor to kick on. So now let's look, I'm going to put this back at 4 because it's more natural. Now let's talk about attack and release. So attack, and I'm going to move this to the middle to make it easier. The attack is basically just how long it takes the compressor to start applying the full dose of compression once this particular instrument has gotten louder than the threshold line. So, you know, once my electric guitar has gotten louder than negative 10 dBs, you know, then my compressor is turned on. Now, this is a really common misconception. A lot of people say, oh, attack is just a delay. You know, like the compressor doesn't turn on until 10 milliseconds because that's what I have the attack set at. That's actually not true. The attack is a rate. It's a rate of change. It's not actually a delay. It's basically just saying, okay, once the instrument has passed the threshold, the compressor is turned on, but it is compressing at a ratio of 1:1, which is functionally no compression. And then over the course of 10 milliseconds, that ratio gets turned up more and more. So at 5 milliseconds, it's a 2:1 ratio. At 7.5 milliseconds, it's a 3:1 ratio, and so on, until by the time 10 milliseconds have passed, it's a 4:1 ratio, and it is applying the full dose of compression. So that's important because, you know, if I set my my attack time to where it's like just after the peaks, because I'm thinking, oh, you know, I'm going to fully let my peaks go through, I'm still going to be compressing my peaks, just not that much. Now, the release is the exact opposite of this. It is how long it takes the compressor to let go of the compression after the sound has gone back beneath the threshold. So again, it's not a delay. It is a rate of change. So if the release is 100 milliseconds and the ratio is 4, then after 50 milliseconds, the ratio is 2. And after 75 milliseconds, the ratio is 1.5. I think you get the idea. We're talking fractions here, right? So it is just slowly letting go of the compression. So what we can think of with attack and release is the attack is kind of like our aggression control. You know, it's how quickly do we want to clamp onto something. And our release is our shape control. Now you can see, let me make the attack pretty fast. You can see that if I turn the release down, the more this blue waveform looks like the original waveform. But if I make the release faster, the more the waveform changes shape. And if you remember, the more the waveform changes shape, the more the tone is changed. And then finally, we've got makeup gain down here. Now this is just volume, but it's volume at the very end of the chain. So basically we have turned down some sound, right? Like the only thing a compressor can do is turn down a sound. We've either turned down the whole note if we're trying to target the macro dynamics. We've turned down just the peaks, or we've turned down just the valleys. So makeup gain is us saying, okay, great. I want to make it as loud as it was before so that it's actually, it's actually doing something. I don't want to just turn something down. I want to turn something down and then turn the whole thing back up, which makes it functionally louder. That's why earlier I was saying, really all we're doing is either making the peaks louder or the valley is louder. So for example, for this, I'm obviously making the valleys louder because I'm turning the peaks down pretty dramatically. But right now, I'm not. I'm just turning everything down. So I'm going to use my makeup gain, turn that up, and boom, I've functionally turned up the valley right here by 3 dBs, 3 decibels. We've got that super thick sound. So I'm going to set this up to where it's a little bit more natural. So now that we've kind of gone over all of the 5 different parts of a compressor, let's talk about the 3 different styles of compression that we are going to be learning how to use today. And all 3 of these different styles of compression use the peak and valley technique to make sure that my settings are in the right areas to actually get the result of what I'm trying to do. So let's start off first with consistent style of compression. Now, if you just think of a compressor, again, making the loud notes quieter, the quiet notes louder, leveling out a performance, that is the consistent style of compression. You know, this is the style that is not meant to change the tone at all. If you're changing the tone, it's way too much. It's only meant to make it sound, excuse me, it's only meant to make the sound fit better in the mix. You know, if something is not very consistent, then you're going to have a really hard time setting the volume balance because there's going to be certain notes that are too loud, so they're popping out of the mix, and there's going to be certain notes that are too quiet, so the instrument is just getting lost behind the rest of the instruments behind it. Or excuse me, the rest of the instruments in front of it. So I actually have a really cool graphic that I use, and it's something that you might be able to get if you hang around to the end of this webinar. It's included in kind of a special thing we're doing. I've got a really cool graphic. Here it is, on how to create the different styles of compression. Now, obviously there's a ton of different styles. We don't have time to go over all of them. We're only going over consistency, punchiness, and thickness. But the way this graphic works is you can see that there is basically a grid that's being created, and it's targeting the threshold, the release, and the attack. So my consistent style of compression, let's look at what settings it's going to have. It's going to have a fast attack, you know, because it's in this row, it's getting pointed at. It's going to have a slow release because it's in this column. And it's going to have a high threshold. So fast attack, slow release, high threshold. Let me go back to here. So let's set that up. So what a high threshold means is we are wanting to set our threshold to target just the peaks, not the valleys. We don't want our compressor to react to the valleys. We only want our compressor to react to the peaks. So my threshold's here. I'm going to turn it down to where it's just barely hitting some of these peaks. Let's say it right here. And this particular waveform, I think the waveform that the guy who, I guess Zach Hughes is who created this. The waveform he used is not a natural waveform. As far as I'm aware, this is a synthesizer waveform. So usually, you know, this would be a peak and then it would go down into a valley. Like the note would look a little bit more just like this. But unfortunately, we've got some weirdness going. So we're just going to call this a valley just for the sake of argument. So I'm going to turn it down to, we'll say right here. Okay. So what's next? Well, we need to have a fast attack. Okay. So let's get a fast attack going. Now, the reason that we want a fast attack is because we are wanting to grab the whole note. We're not going to want to change the microdynamics at all, which means that we are going to want to turn down both the peaks and the valleys. We're not turning up the peaks, we're not turning up the valleys, we're turning down both the peaks and the valleys. So in order to do that, we cannot let the peaks get through the compressor uncompressed. Now, the next thing we need to do is a slower release. So I'm going to go to my release. I'm going to slow it down. Now, look and see what happens. Now, both look at the blue waveform and at the big red blob, because you're going to see more compression is actually being added. In fact, quite a bit more compression is about to be added. This is not that much compression if you're just thinking about like how much the needle is moving. And yet it's changing the waveform, the shape of the waveform pretty dramatically. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to turn it down, and look at what is happening. We are conserving the original shape of the waveform, but we're applying more compression. So we've got our threshold, we've got our attack and release. Those are the three most important things we have to get. So now let's set our ratio. So I'm going to just give this a ratio of, let's just say 2 to 1. Pretty small. We'll actually go with 3 to 1. 2.5. It doesn't really matter. So finally, let's add our makeup gain. And I'm going to make up basically so that my kind of medium loudness notes are pretty much where they were before. So I'm going to turn this up. Really, we only need to turn it up by probably 1.5. Yeah. So let's look at what has happened. This functionally has not been turned up. This valley functionally has not been turned up, or rather this note has not been turned up or down. But this peak right here, so this note, this has been turned down. This really loud moment has gotten turned down. We have leveled out the performance, but we have not changed the tone at all. We've kept our peaks and our valleys looking pretty much the same that they were before. So consistent style of compression or leveling is something that you hear used quite a lot in the audio engineering industry. You know, this is probably your most important type of compression. It's the thing that is the difference between a mix that works and a mix that doesn't work. The other stuff is stuff that makes your mix seem, larger than life, bigger than it ever could be, just on a regular old stage. But the consistent style of compression, this is what actually creates consistent tracks that you can use as building blocks in your mix. Now you can see, I don't really have very aggressive settings here. I have a very high threshold. I'm only targeting the high stuff. My ratio is not very aggressive at all because, the higher the ratio, the closer it gets to limiting and the more it actually changes the shape. Like, let me show you. So this, for example, the shape is really changed. Like the entire top of this peak gets chopped off. Top of this peak gets chopped off. We don't want that. We've got a really fast attack, which, I maybe don't need it to be quite as fast as it is, but the reason I'm doing that, again, is because I'm wanting to grab the note very, very quickly, but the release is so slow that I'm turning the whole note down, so I'm not actually chopping off the transients. And that's something that people talk about a lot with fast attack times. They're really worried about, chopping off the transients, making it sound, quote unquote, lifeless. But this combination, fast attack, slower release, that is what is going to keep these microdynamics the same, going to keep them intact, and is just going to, like a seesaw, rebalance your performance. So something I do with this a lot is I'll actually do what's known as serial compression. I'll have a few different compressors in series, and they're all doing this style of compression. And all that's doing is just sort of slowly, turning these louder notes down so that, every single compressor, I can turn the threshold down by, a dB or more. And every single time I turn that threshold down by a dB, I'm leveling out the performance by a dB. It's a really great system. It's something that I use, probably 2/3 of the compression in every mix I do is this. Now, it's important to say, if you're using synthesizers, this might not be quite as necessary for you because you have access to the velocity of every single MIDI note. And, you can just basically go and find the notes that are too loud and just turn them down yourself using the velocity. I would personally rather do that because I have more control over it. So this style of compression, maybe not as useful for you, but if you were doing anything with acoustic instruments, and acoustic also means electric guitar and electric bass, you are gonna need this style of compression. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to get a studio sound, an actually consistent sound. So let's look at our next style of compression. And we're going to be going over all of these in the DAW in a little bit, but I just want you to understand what's going on behind the hood first. So the next style of compression that we are going to look at, let me bring up my chart, is thickness compression. Okay? So we are going to be having a fast attack, another fast attack. We're going to be having a fast release. That's the difference. And we're going to be having a high threshold. So what does that mean? Well, that means that our threshold is set high enough to where it is not reacting to the valleys. It's only reacting to the peaks. Our attack is also fast, so it's catching those peaks very quickly. But this time our release is fast. So what that means is rather than turning the compressor on so that it lasts for the entirety of the note, the moment that the peak is over and we get into the valley, the compression stops. So what that means is we are turning down the peaks. We're not touching the valleys, we're just turning down the peaks. So let me turn all of this off, zero this out. Okay, so set this right here. First thing I'm going to do, set my threshold. So I'm going to set it, like I said, to where it's really only hitting these peaks, these loud points. Then I'm going to set my attack. I'm going to get it to be really fast. Now, with the visualizer, I unfortunately don't know the numbers of any of these things. So I don't actually know if this attack is maybe too fast for the real world or not. But just for the sake of argument, we're just going to put it all the way at the end. And now we're going to set our release. And again, check out how much change we get with the waveform, the shape of the waveform, and how much less compression we get with our red blob up here. Boom. So we have way less compression. The only thing that's getting compressed is the stuff that is above the threshold, which is not that much. And our shape is really different. So now let's say I'm going to turn my makeup gain up so that it is at the same volume of my initial peak. So check this out. Look how much bigger this waveform is. It is massive in comparison to what it was before. It's huge. And that's the thing with thickness style compression. It not only sounds thick, it looks thick. You know, if we go back to our DAW and we look at our electric guitar, this is what we're seeing. We are seeing a super thick looking waveform, the same as we're seeing right here. So basically what I'm doing here is I am thickening out this sound so that it sounds as cool and as large and as big and as just like full as an electric guitar would, you know, a distorted electric guitar. Now, obviously, I can set my ratio to be whatever, let me turn this down, whatever I want it to be. I don't love my ratios for this to be super aggressive because then it just starts to become a limiter and you can kind of start to get some pretty crappy sounds doing that. You know, sometimes I'll only do 2 dBs. You know, if I do that, I functionally turned up my my valleys by 2 decibels, right? Because I only needed 2 dBs of gain, of makeup gain, to get this back to where it was originally. On the flip side, if I did a, let's say, a ratio of 8 to 1, I turn this up, it's probably 3.5. Yeah. So now I've basically turned up my my valleys by 3.5 dBs. So however much you turn up your makeup gain, that is how much you are turning up your valleys. Or if you're trying to turn up your peaks, that's how loud you are turning up your peaks, right? So I'm going to take that back down where it was. Let's put this back in the middle, average-wise. Okay. So we have one more style of compression, that I want to show you on this visualizer, and that is punchy style of compression. So let me bring up this chart. So if you look around here, it is down here, punchy style. Now, punchy style, if we go back to our DAW, punchy style is basically what we were talking about with our snare. We've got a super loud peak and a very quiet valley. So what's interesting with this, is we're basically trying to turn the peaks of a sound up using a compressor. Now I want everyone to think about what I just said. I'm wanting to turn the peaks up and the valleys down. I basically just said, I want to turn the loud sounds up louder and the quiet sounds down quieter, which is the exact opposite of what everyone says you use a compressor for. Everyone's just like, oh, like I said, you make the loud sounds quieter, the quiet sounds louder. You do not have to do that. You can change up how you are affecting the tone of an instrument by changing what you are trying to get the compressor to do. That's part of the reason why I was very clear to say what a compressor is for is to control the dynamic range. It's not to make loud sounds quieter and quiet sounds louder. It's just to control the dynamic range and make it do what you want it to do. We are controlling the volume envelope. So let's look at punchy. So we've got pretty much the exact opposite settings that we had for thickness style. We have as you can see right here, we've got a slow attack, we have a slow release, and we have a low threshold. Now, when I say a low threshold, what I mean by that, is that rather than just targeting the peaks, we are now targeting the valleys. We are wanting the valleys to be above the threshold line. So basically, if I was to turn this down, I'd want it to be pretty darn low to where, this whole thing is below the threshold and it doesn't really let up until it gets quite a bit quieter. Now, this might seem super aggressive, but once we change up our settings, you're going to see that it actually is not as aggressive as it looks. So one more time. We've got a slow attack, a slow release, a low threshold. So let us set that up. So let's start off with our threshold. We're going to take this and we're going to turn it down. And like I said, we want it to be beneath the peaks. So we're not putting it here where we had it before, where it was only hitting the loud points. We are having it down here where it's on quite a bit and it doesn't turn off until it's a little bit closer towards the end of the valley. So next, let's set up our attack and release. So first things first, let's set up our attack. So if I was to make this go faster, obviously that turns down the peaks, that turns down the loud notes. But if I make it slower, look at what it does. It does the opposite. It turns up the peaks. It makes them louder and louder and louder and louder until they are almost as loud as they were before. The compressor is basically letting the peaks pass through unharmed. So now let's look at our release. Now, if I was to have a really fast release, we get kind of some wonkiness. I'm going to make a very slow release. So check out what's happening. A ton of compression, right? Just a lot of compression. And I'm actually going to change this up just a hair to make this make a little bit more sense functionally. There we go. You'll see later on when we talk about this, you'll see when I say fast attack and slow attack, sometimes a fast attack could be a medium attack. Sometimes a slow attack could be a medium attack. Really, a fast or slow attack or release is more just the starting place to find where works best for that instrument. So I'm not necessarily saying put the attack as high as it'll go and the release as high as it'll go. It's just a place to start your search. So let's stick with right here. Okay, so let's check out what's happened. We've turned down our peaks very little, but we've turned down our valleys quite a bit. So I'm going to turn this up just so that my peak is just as loud as it was before. Boom. So Functionally, we have just turned down our valleys quite a bit. We've turned up our peaks quite a bit. We've done the exact opposite of what people usually talk about with compression. We have made the loud sounds louder, the quiet sounds quieter. Now I'm going to turn up the makeup gain so that the valleys are the same volume that they were before. So check this out. Basically what I did, the valleys are now roughly the same volume they were before, roughly, but my peak is crazy loud. I basically made my peak 5 decibels louder than it was before. So what that means is I'm now getting that punch in the chest sound that you were hearing whenever you were hearing that snare. Just that crack, that punch, that super in your face sound. But we're not necessarily getting, we're not getting all of that thickness that we were getting if we had the opposite, where it's just a sausage. We are getting big peaks, small valleys. So we're going to move into our DAW. I want to review this really quickly one more time. 3 styles. These are the 3 biggest styles of compression that the pros use. Consistent style compression to target the macro dynamic performance, and punchy and thickness style compression to target the micro dynamic performance, or not performance, just the sound of the instrument. If I want to change the tone, I'm wanting either punchy compression or thickness compression. If I'm wanting to level out the performance to make it fit better in the mix, I want consistency style of compression. And to review, again, bring this up, a consistent style of compression, you got a fast attack, a slow release, and a high threshold, so it's only targeting the peaks and it's lasting for the whole note. Thickness style, fast attack, high threshold, but a fast release, so it's only turning down the peaks, not the valleys. And a punchy style of compression is the exact opposite. It's a slow release, slow attack, low threshold. So only the valleys are getting compressed and the peaks are being let through relatively unharmed. So now that we've gone over all of the theory, let's take the next, we'll say 20 to 30 minutes, and we are going to review how to actually set up your compressor and create these sounds. We're going to actually go into our DAW and get started. Okay, so let's say I wanted to create some consistency. Let's start with that. Now, this is obviously a guitar track that needs a lot of consistency. There are just these loud notes that pop out of nowhere that really keep it from actually sitting well in the mix. I can tell you that from experience. This is from a song that I wrote, and this guitar was the worst to mix. And it was before, this was many, many years ago. It was before I understood this concept of compression. So I'm going to bring up a compressor, and I'm actually going to, bring up the Fab Filter Pro C2. And the reason I'm doing that is because I still want to have a little bit of a visual element just to teach you. So I'm not using this because it's a better compressor or not a better compressor than, for example, just the Logic Pro compressor, which I actually use all the time. And this is what yours probably looks like. And we'll get into how to use this in a little bit. But what the Fab Filter has over that is that whenever I hit play, it actually shows what's happening to the waveform. So we can sort of get a little bit of the best of both worlds. We get our visualization and we get to actually hear what's happening. So I'm going to, I wish I could make this smaller. It's so dang big. I can. Great. Okay. So let's look at one more time what we're working with here. For consistent style, fast attack, slow release, high threshold. So let me do this. And we are going to set the threshold, attack, and release where it needs to be. And I'm not actually going to, well, no, I actually will. I'm going to use the style of setting up your compressor that I'm going to teach you at the very end of this course. So this will just be like a little preview for you. Okay, this is going to sound really bad, but that is totally the point. It's okay. So the first thing we're going to do is set our threshold. So I'm going to set it to where it's only getting triggered by these really, really loud notes, not the rest of them. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my attack and my release. Now, my attack, this is way too fast. I'm going to want it to be somewhere between, basically 1 microsecond and 1 millisecond. Now, a lot of compressors have attacks that are this fast. That's a very, very common thing. It's really scary for a lot of newbies because using fast attack times can really screw up your sound if you don't know what you're doing. But as long as you are trying to get a consistent style and you are, compressing with intention, it's going to work out for you. But again, as I was saying before, this is just a good starting place. Quite a few times, especially if I have longer peaks, I tend to have attack times that are a little bit more in the medium range, which medium for attack time, it's usually like 1 millisecond to 10 milliseconds. So let's set that. Okay, that sounded pretty good to me. Now you're obviously hearing a lot of that like compression that's coming from that. That's because we are using a hyper fast release time. Now you can only make a release time so fast before it starts to distort. We'll talk about that once we actually get to thickness style. So I'm going to make this much slower. Now the trick for this is that you actually want to set the release. If you can, you want to set it in time with the song, like literally to the tempo of the song. So I'm going to get up my, let me get it right here. I'm going to get up my metronome and I'm going to turn this off. Usually I would do this ahead of time. And I'm going to figure out what the BPM of this particular track is. Now, if you're working on a mix, you don't have to do that because it's right here. It's whatever the grid BPM is. But I'm going to figure that out. Okay, so that's like roughly 150 beats per minute. That's basically what the tempo is. So there is a trick to figure out around where to set your release time for things like this. Now, these types of things I'm about to show you, they exist on the internet. You can go to free websites that have them. You can learn the algorithm yourself. I like downloading them as an app. I'm talking about the delay time calculator. This is a free software from a company called the Lion's Den. It's totally free. And basically what it does is you can type in the tempo of a song, so 150, and it will show you how many milliseconds each particular note length is. So for example, here's a quarter note. A quarter note at 150 beats per minute is 400 milliseconds long. A 30-second note is 50 milliseconds long. A dotted 16th note is 150 milliseconds long. This makes setting your release times a lot easier because the reason that we are wanting to time our releases is because we are wanting the compressor to pretty much turn off by the time the next note starts so that we're not turning down the next note as well. Now, again, we are just trying to find a good starting position. I don't always literally pick the exact number, but I will usually get within like 50 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds on either side. So for this, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to think, okay, how fast is this performance? So it's going like da 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 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1. So it's eighth notes, ba 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 ba, right? So I'm going to want to set my time to probably be somewhere between 200 and 400 milliseconds, because 200 is an eighth note, 400 is a quarter note. There are eighths and quarters in this song. So I'm going to start turning this down. And you can see, my gain reduction up here, it's starting to get more and more curved, which basically means I am starting to actually level out the note without changing how loud the peak versus the valley is. All right, I'm gonna leave it at that for now. Okay, now I'm going to go in here. I'm actually going to turn my knee up a little bit. I like my knee to be, for electric guitar is kind of medium to hard, but not super hard. Okay, so now I'm going to turn my ratio down. So obviously this is so aggressive that it's distorting. It is changing the tone. I don't want that. So I'm going to turn it all the way to 1:1, and I'm going to slowly start to mix it in until I'm getting the amount of gain reduction that I want. This is the last step in setting up your compression. And so for me, I might know like, oh, I really only want to get 2 dBs of compression with this. Because like I said, a lot of times I do serial compression so that I can just get those notes a little bit closer to the rest of them while it still sounds very, very natural and it's not so aggressive that it starts to change the tone. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, so we're getting somewhere between 1 and about 3 dBs of compression. That's perfect. That's all I want. But you can see just looking at, I'll take this back out, just looking at the waveform, those loud notes are starting to get quieter and quieter. So I'm just moving them in the right direction. So if I was to continue to do this, I might, grab this. I might copy it down to do some serial compression. I probably would want to turn my threshold down a little bit to compensate. I might even do it one more time. And you can see the more of this compression that I do, the more I'm grabbing other notes. So with consistency style, if you're wanting to do serial compression, that first layer is just to grab the very loudest note. And then the second layer is to grab more of the loud notes. If you want to do a third layer, that's to grab like the loud and the medium notes until you have pretty much fully leveled out your performance. And I'm not trying to get it to be a brick wall or anything. I'm just trying to get, just inch a little bit more consistency out of this performance. Ooh, I just realized, so something I didn't do that I should have been doing is I should have been turning up my my makeup gain a little bit. I didn't do that. So I probably took out, we'll just say like a dB and a half from each of these. You can see I've basically just turned up all of these quieter notes. Okay, now I'm going to go in here and compensate for that. Okay, that's doing probably 2 dBs of compression. Okay, and now let's go to our last one. There's some resonances in here I'd need to cut. But yeah, I'd probably turn that up by 1 dB. So ignoring the EQ resonances that are very aggressive in that track, let's listen to a before and after. Now, again, the point of this is not to have much of a tonal change. The point is more to just have a more level performance. Something that might not matter if I'm listening to it in solo, but if I was listening to this in a mix, I would go from having an electric guitar that just was not fitting no matter where I set the volume, to having an electric guitar that I can set it and forget it and move on. So here's before. And listen specifically to those loud notes. And here's after. It's way more consistent. Those quieter notes are louder. The louder notes are a little bit quieter. I personally would probably go back and turn down some of the makeup gain we did just so that the quieter notes aren't quite as loud. But functionally, we've basically turned, let's look at this. So that's 2 dBs, that's dB and a half, and that's a dB. So that is, we've basically turned the quiet notes of this performance up by 4.5 decibels. So if I was to, let's just bounce this in place because you'll be able to see it on the waveform. All of a sudden, we've got a way more consistent performance. And I'll turn down the gain so that it looks a little bit closer to what it did before. So there we go. Basically, just these notes that were sticking out are now way closer to the rest of the notes. And I wasn't trying to get rid of all of the macro dynamics. I still want some musicality in my performance. And at this point, I might go in with some volume automation, just like grab a few things, just to level out just a hair more if I was wanting to get very picky. But that's it. That's all I would do. So, just because I see we're running out of time, let's move on to punchy style. So punchy style is a little bit less complicated than consistency style, in my opinion. And I'm going to go over to my drums over here. Drums are very easy to hear the effects of both punchy and thickness style compression. Let me cut this off. Okay, so I'm going to grab my compressor. And remember, punchy style, if I go back here, it is a slow attack, a slow release, and a low threshold. And I'm trying to turn up the peaks and down the valleys. Now, obviously, this is already a very punchy sounding drum set, but we are just going to enhance the punch. So let's zero out our compressor, turn our threshold all the way up, our knee all the way down, ratio all the way up, turn off auto gain, to our attack and release as fast as possible. Okay, so let's start off with the threshold. We are wanting to turn it down to where it's pretty low so that it's targeting the valleys, not the peaks. So we're wanting to set it to where the gain reduction is still returning to 0, but it's taking a lot longer to return to 0 than if we were just targeting the peaks. Because the peaks are going to return to 0 very quickly. Whereas if you're targeting the valleys, it's going to take a little bit longer to get there. The amount of gain reduction isn't really all that important because we're going to be changing the ratio pretty dramatically. So we won't be getting nearly this much compression. So next up, we are going to set up our attack and our release. So I want my attack to be a little bit slower. Usually I like it to be somewhere in between 10 and 50 milliseconds. Drums are very fast with their peaks. Their transients are very, very quick. So I don't need it to be crazy slow. Probably going to end up being somewhere around like 20 or 30. Okay, now I'm going to set up my release. And at this point, you can basically just see, all of a sudden I'm letting the peaks through, but I'm still getting those really big spikes. And that's because the peaks are triggering compression, but the compression isn't actually turning on, or rather it is turning on, but it's not getting its full dose until it gets to the valley. I want to set my release so that it's still getting back to 0 before the next beat. So not too slow, but not too fast. Okay. I'm going to set my knee just a little bit less. Knees usually, a hard knee is better for percussive sounds. A soft knee is better for more sustained sounds. Okay, and now I'm going to set my ratio how I want it to. And just so that you can hear what it sounds like, I'm going to be pretty aggressive with my ratio. I'm going to try to get like 6 dBs of compression. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it up until the valleys are about as loud as they were before. Now to do that, I like using what's known as a loudness meter. So there are 2 different kinds of volume in your DAW, and unfortunately I don't really have time to get into this a ton, but there is what's known as dBFS, or dB full scale, down here, and there is loudness known as LUFS, LUFS. Now most DAWs come stock with a loudness meter these days. If not, there are free ones on the internet. But basically, dB full scale, which is what your DAW primarily uses to show you volume, is super accurate, super fast, right? But our ears don't actually hear sound accurately. We tend to hear sound in averages. So rather than hearing how loud something is, every single millisecond, our ear kind of takes the average loudness of a sound over the course of like 300 milliseconds and then sends that signal to our brain and says like, hey, here's how loud this thing is. So that's what a loudness meter checks, is kind of like what we are actually hearing. Now loudness, because it takes so long to, actually get processed by our ears, loudness meters tend to focus more on the valleys of the sound, whereas full scale meters, your DAW's volume meter, that tends to focus more on the peaks of the sound. So if I'm wanting to turn the valleys up, I'm going to want to check my loudness meter. So let's check out where it was before. So it's kind of sitting around 26 dBs, just about. Now let's see where it's at after. Okay, so now it's sitting at about 30. So that means I've lost about 4 decibels in my valleys. I want to turn those up to where they were before so that I can turn my peaks up. So turn that up to there. Now let's listen to a before and after, and listen to just how much more in your chest you're going to feel this drum set. So here's before. And here's after. And it's really as loud as it was before. I'm going to actually turn it down to like 3.5. But it just hits you harder. And that's just because we've changed the tone. We have made it more aggressive in the peaks and less aggressive in the valleys. So here's before. And here's after. You hear that aggression that's going on in there. And you can do this on pretty much any instrument. I mean, anything that you want to be punchier, you can add this style of compression to. I usually add these styles of compression that are more about changing the tone. I usually add them after consistency style of compression. I want my performance to be level, my macro dynamics to be leveled, and then I want to affect the tone because I don't want anything to get lost because maybe some notes are too quiet or some notes are too loud. This is also the style that I usually will do for parallel compression. Like if you're doing any parallel compression, either thickness style or punchy style, that's usually what you're going to be doing because you're going to be wanting to change the tone. You are trying to affect the tone in some way. Consistency style is not going to be used in parallel because like you're just trying to level out the performance. You're not changing the tone. You're not really wanting to have a mix that's going on in there. So now let's look at thickness style compression. And we're still going to use the drums, honestly, because the drums are just a great example for styles of compression. So let's go back to our chart. Thickness style. We've got a fast attack, a fast release, and a high threshold. So again, that means we are only turning down our peaks. We're targeting our peaks. We have a fast attack, so the compressor is clamping down on our peaks really quickly. We have a fast release, so that the compressor is letting go of the compression very quickly as soon as it goes lower than the threshold. Excuse me. So I'm going to get rid of that and let us zero everything out again. Okay. So we're turning down the threshold and we're just going to want to get small, quick blips of gain reduction. Now visually you can see I'm just kind of want to turn down these spikes. I'm not trying to go all the way down here where we were before. Excuse me. Just trying to grab that. Okay, next we are going to set our attack and release. So fast attack, fast release. I usually don't want the fastest attack. For drums, I try to get somewhere between the fastest attack and 1 millisecond. So let's do that. Okay, now I'm going to set my release. Again, fast release. Now, releases that are fast, those tend to be kind of between 25 milliseconds and like 75 milliseconds, somewhere in there. I tend to find myself using a little bit closer to 25, but if you start getting too fast, especially if you're using a cheaper compressor, the compression starts to break down and you start to get a lot of distortion. You start to just get some weirdness. I just would really avoid super, super fast release times. At this point, they just have really not figured out the technology to have them yet. Okay, that's pretty good to me. So now let's take our ratio all the way down. I'm going to set my knee up a little bit. And I'm going to slowly mix it in until I'm getting the amount of gain reduction that I want. I'm going to go for, again, just so that you can hear it, I'm going to go for about 6 dBs of gain reduction. It's a shame. My kicks, I needed to do some leveling on this. My kicks and my snares are not the same level, so it's not going to work quite as well. Anywho, so now that we've done that, we are going to want to add some makeup gain so that our peaks are the same volume, so that our valleys are turned up. Now that means we're going to look, excuse me. Now that means we are going to be looking at our dB full scale meter. We're looking at that meter that's super accurate, super fast. I'm going to try to get it to where it's peaking at around the same level. So let's see where it's peaking at before compression. Okay, so about negative 5.2. And now after compression, about negative 10, so quite a bit, about 5 dBs. So I'm going to show you a before and after. Here's before, and here's after. Before and after. Sounds huge, right? Super thick. And that's even with me not getting the most aggressive I possibly could. Like I could go a little bit lower with the threshold, a little bit more aggressive with the ratio, and get even more thickness if I wanted to. Now at a certain point, I'm going to start to lose like the life of the instrument. Certain instruments are made to have a certain volume envelope. Electric guitars don't sound weird to us because we are used to hearing the sound of a distorted electric guitar. But we're not used to hearing the sound of a drum set that has just no microdynamic range, where the peaks and the valleys are like right next to each other. To us, to our ears, that would sound just unbelievably harsh and fake because we know what a drum set sounds like in reality because it's based on a real, actual instrument. So at a certain point, you're going to lose what's known as the life of an instrument. It's going to start to sound lifeless. That's something that's usually not so much of a problem with synthesizers because they're not based on actual instruments in the world. But if it's based on something that is an actual instrument in the world, you don't want to go so far that you're just killing the dynamics. But you do want to go far enough that you're getting the style of thickness that you are going for. So let's do before and after one more time. After. Just huge. And the crazy thing is like, it's peaking at the exact same level over here. Negative 5.2. It's literally peaking at the same place it was before. So based on the computer, it's as loud as it was before, but our ears hear it to be way louder because the valleys are turned up by 5 dBs. So let's really quickly just review how to set up a compressor while you're using this style. And then we are going to move on in this webinar. So I'm going to bring up Logic Pro's compressor because that's what everyone else is going to be using. I mean, not necessarily Logic Pro specifically, but this is going to be a little bit closer to what your compressor probably looks like. And let's go over here. Oh my goodness. Let's use you. How about that? Sure. Okay, so remember the first thing you want to do is to zero out all of your knobs. And this basically just allows you to target the part of the volume envelope that you're trying to target. If you have all of your settings at places where they aren't crazy extreme, finding the peaks or finding the valleys is going to just be really, really difficult. So that's why I'm doing this. That's why my ratio is crazy high. My attack is crazy fast. My release is crazy fast. My knee is so low. The reason I'm doing that is to basically turn my gain reduction meter into a microscope and to specifically be able to lock in on the part of the waveform that I'm wanting to target. Okay, let's do this. So let's say I wanted to do, it's pretty thick as it is, so I'm going to do punchy style compression on this. So low threshold, very slow attack, and slow release. So first thing I'm going to do, sorry, I meant to zero that out, set my threshold. So if I was trying to do thickness style compression, I'd probably stop here because I'd just be getting those peaks. And that's all I would want to get. But I'm going to keep going because I'm wanting to get into the valleys. And you can see that when a note is held out, it goes down, but it goes down much more slowly. And that's what I'm looking for, because there's more sound that is above the threshold. So now I'm going to set up my attack and my release. I'm not touching makeup gain, ratio, or knee. So for both of these, I'm wanting slow attack, slow release, because I'm letting the peaks go through. I'm only turning down the valleys. Okay, now to turn my release down. Now this is another one that needs to be leveled first before I do this, but you'll get the idea. This is another reason why leveling is so important, is because it allows you to target more accurately what part of the volume envelope you're trying to hit. So I want to stick with kind of a medium release instead of a fast release, because this is a pretty fast performance. The faster the performance, usually the less fast, or slow rather, the less slow you can have your release. So now I'm going to increase the knee a little bit. This is sort of halfway in between a super percussive sound and a super sustained sound, so I'll probably get a knee that's halfway. And I wouldn't stress too hard about the knee. That's a bit more advanced than we have time to talk about right now, but just use those as your rules of thumbs. If it's percussive, a hard knee. If it is more sustained, like a string or something, a soft knee, and everything else somewhere in the middle. And sometimes you have to adjust your threshold after doing that. Okay, now I'm going to turn my ratio down and slowly mix it in until I'm getting the amount of compression I want. And I don't really want that much compression on this, honestly. Then finally, I'm wanting to turn my peaks up, so I'm going to grab my loudness meter and I'm going to turn my valleys up to where they are the level they were before, which will functionally turn my peaks up. So let's look at where it was before. Okay, so about 23, and let's do it again. Okay, so probably 25, 26, so I'm going to turn it up by 2.5. Yeah, there we go. Cool, so here's a quick before and after. So here's before. Here's after. And it's subtle, and I made it that way on purpose. But those beginning notes, those beginning peaks are just a little bit more like da 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 da. You feel them a little bit more. And after I did some leveling, I might want to be really aggressive with this and put it in parallel so I could just really subtly mix it in and get some of that sound that I'm looking for. Okay, so that is the peak and valley technique. Or rather, that is part of the peak and valley technique. The peak and valley technique ultimately is large and it's a lot of content, but it's very, very simple. And more importantly than anything, it helps you to understand the framework of how to compress a mix from start to finish and be able to compress everything with intention. And that's the first thing that I'm going to want to talk to you about. We're going to have a Q&A session in a little bit, but first I want to share with you how you can get access to the rest of the peak and valley technique and ultimately change up how you are doing compression for the rest of your life. Honestly, this is going to change so much of the quality of your mixes. I can guarantee it. I really can. So I'm going to bring up just a little something that I prepared for you. I want to give you an offer here. I've got a really exciting thing. I want to talk to you about where you can go from here, now that you know what you know. So at this point, you basically have, you've got two options. Option one, you can go it alone and you could potentially waste years trying to figure out compression. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to hit roadblocks and you're going to wonder where you're going wrong. And trust me, that's going to happen because that is what happened to me before I figured all this stuff out. Or option 2, you can dive deeper into the peaks and valleys and you can master the recipe that makes compression easy. And that's because one of the keys to mixing radio-ready music, it's a system that allows you to master compression quickly and easily. Seriously, it is one of the biggest things that is going to affect the quality of your music. If you can master compression, be able to do it quickly, be able to do it with intention, it is going to help so much of your mix. And I wish that we could give you everything right now. Really, truly, I do. But we would be here all day. So some of you might remember the compression breakthrough program that we launched a couple of months ago. That's still closed to the public. But I want to do something cool for everyone here on this masterclass, this webinar. I want to do something cool for you right now. I have a special offer that I'm going to share with you, and it's not going to be available anywhere else. Anywhere else. Seriously, only for the people who are on this live stream right now are going to get access to this. We are going to reopen Compression Breakthrough for you. And that is the course that goes over every single part of the peak and valley technique. It goes over every single part of how to compress your mixes with intention. So let's talk about what this actually is, other than the very broad overview I just gave you. So Compression Breakthrough, it's a self-paced online course that gives you a simple framework for compressing any mix that you have. There's no more guessing, what to compress and when to compress it. There's no more straining to hear the differences that your compressor is actually making because you know what you're trying to achieve. There's no more using default presets because that's all you really know what to do with your particular instruments. Instead, you're going to have a step-by-step system for the entire compression process. The core of this program is the peak and valley technique, and that's what you have sort of learned the introduction to. It produces these high-quality mixes without these endless hours messing around with presets and control knobs. And we have a range of different assignments that are spread throughout the course. And this is actually one of my favorite parts of the course, is we've basically created homework for you. And as gross as that sounds, and trust me, it's gross to me too, practice is vital. And I can give you all the information in the world, but if you don't try it and you don't do it, you're never going to learn how to actually compress with intention. So we give you these assignments throughout to help to understand the information that you're learning. So here's some of the information that you'll learn. You're going to learn the 4 goals of compression, and that is to balance, to enhance, to glue, and to fix, so that you'll be able to compress with intention rather than just twiddling knobs. You're going to learn how to make your entire mix sound consistent and thick and punchy and groovy, or any combination of these depending on your goals for that track. And then we're going to be looking at creating depth in your song by making different instruments sound closer or farther away to the listener in your mix. And you're even going to be figuring out how to tell if something is overcompressed. You're going to learn our secrets to spotting overcompression and how to fix it. Plus, we're going to share with you my A/B method, which shows you basically just how to fix your compressor so that you can actually hear what is happening to it. You know what you are adding, you know what you're taking away, and you know if you're compressing well, and if you just need to get rid of your compressor. It's scientific listening. And then finally, we're going to be covering the threshold, release ratio, all of this stuff, so that you're not left wondering about any of it. And we're covering it in much more detail than we covered it in this particular video. We are taking deep dives into each one of these separate settings so that you actually have an understanding of what it's doing and how they interact with each other. So you're also going to learn how to get your instruments to sound loud in the mix without the track clipping. You're going to learn how to overcome a less than perfect recording environment, how you could use a compressor to fix a noisy room, to fix a super loud room with no acoustic treatment, maybe a living room that you record in. And then we're going to learn how to combine different types of compression to get a more consistent, colorful studio sound. You're going to learn part of the reason why studio tracks sound as good as they do. And a lot of them is because they mix styles of compression together in very specific ways. We're also going to take you through the main phases of compression in a mix, the pre-mix, the mix bus, and the 4 goals of compression. You are literally going to get a step-by-step method for doing compression throughout your mix. Steps where you're only going to have to focus on doing one thing at a time. That's something that was so important to me when I was creating this course, is being able to teach you how to push out all of the distractions and only focus on achieving one thing at a time. You're going to compress so much faster and so much better if you're able to do that. You're also going to learn how to analog your mix. You're going to learn how to make it sound warmer and how to get more color and control out of your compressor. Again, you're going to learn part of the reason why studio tracks sound as good as they do. There is actually some stuff going on behind the scenes that really does change a lot. And honestly, you're going to learn even more than this. Seriously, there are so many videos in this thing, and I just could not write everything in a slideshow for you. It's going to cover everything you need to know about compression. And with all this information, you're going to be an expert with a compressor. And I know that from experience that it's going to lead to a breakthrough in the quality of your mixes. And after all, this is one of the most crucial plugins in your DAW. And that's why getting confident with compression has a significant impact on both the quality of your work and the enjoyment that you have while mixing. Plus, everything is hosted on a private website. You can log in and continue with the course, at your own pace. There's no rush because you have lifetime access. Here's just an image of what it actually looks like. You have access to all of the different modules, all of the different videos as much as you want. Here's another picture of what it looks like. So now I want to talk to you about just some of the feedback that we got from this first round of this course. Y'all, I have just been so humbled by how positive the feedback has been. I don't say that to be bragging. I just say that to be like, I put my heart and soul into this thing, man. And like the fact that everyone has learned as much as they have has just made me so happy. So here's an example. The compression breakthrough course is exactly that, a breakthrough. It's so good. And someone even down there saying the EQ breakthrough course that Dylan made earlier, it was great. And this one is even better. Here's another example. Someone asking how the compression breakthrough course is, and people just saying stuff like this. It shows you everything you need to know about compression and why and how to us it and what it can do. So far, the most useful information I've ever come across online. It's pure gold. And here's some more just different ones. Excellent teacher. I've been using compressors for years. Now I know what I've been doing wrong. Dylan's a superstar and has done a tremendous job throughout. World's best compression class, I reckon. Explanations are so clear and easy to follow and understand. I am totally amazed by this course. I'm so glad I got this course. It's really enhanced what I thought I knew about compression, which really wasn't much at all. And it's showing me so much more about compression than I thought it was. And there's so many more of these pieces of feedback. I could, again, put slides and slides of these. I was just so humbled by all of this. So who is this for? It's for musicians who record their own music at home, no matter the genre, no matter the DAW, and no matter the skill level. I really wanted to make sure that everyone knows this. If you're an absolute beginner, we start by going over what compression is and how it works. But if you're intermediate or advanced, the course dives in deep after we cover the basics. So there is truly something for everybody. And here's another question for you. Can't I learn this from YouTube? Sure. You can learn about this stuff from YouTube, but most of it is surface level and nobody has the peaks and valley technique. This is truly something that is unique. It's something that you're going to learn that is just going to be in this course. Plus, most of it is just tips and tricks. There's no big picture, and there's too much information, and you never really know who to trust. This is everything in one package. And as far as how long it's going to take, it's only about 8 hours long. It's self-paced. You can log in and work through the lessons when it suits you. So let's talk about what you'll actually get if you purchase this on this call, because we have some bonuses for you that just weren't even around earlier. Seriously. So we're offering the Compression Breakthrough course with 8 hours of video. We're offering a bonus of recording and mixing fundamentals, which is usually really expensive. It's $300. Another bonus of in-depth feedback on your music with a professional engineer, and another bonus, which is the Studio Sessions bundle, which we'll talk about in a second. All of this, if you were to buy it separately, would usually cost you $894. So much. So let's talk about what each of these bonuses are. So in the Recording and Mixing Fundamentals course, Rob covers the key plugins that every engineer needs just whenever they're mixing in their spare room, or even if they're mixing in a multi-million-dollar studio. He shares stuff about signal flow and gain staging and finishing your mix. This is basically just, if you don't really know much about recording and mixing, this is a course to bring you up to speed. And then next we have our in-depth feedback on the music. This is a genuine shortcut for making leaps and bounds in your mixing process without hiring an expensive coach. You'll be able to submit your mix, upload it, and we're going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, analyze the sounds and settings, and give you useful advice on what to tweak and where. Seriously, this is a massive shortcut to getting better mixes, because we're going to be able to tell you personally where to start. And then finally, our Studio Sessions bundle. It's basically 9 start-to-finish mix walkthroughs. You're going to see everything. You're going to see engineers start from the beginning of a mix and work all the way to the very end. They're usually about 4 to 8 hours, but there's great navigation just so that you can, watch as much as you want, whenever you want. So here's my offer for everyone watching this right now. This won't be available anywhere else, and it's going to disappear at the end of this webinar. So it's only allowed for a moment. Instead of $894, we are offering this course today for just a few minutes for $199. Oh my gosh. So I don't know how we're able to sell all of this stuff for this price, but so much on a sale. So $199, we are going to be basically selling this at this URL down below, musicianonamission.com/compression breakthrough. So again, that's musicianonamission.com/compression breakthrough. If you go to that link, you'll be able to put in whatever information is needed, and you will get access to this course to learn everything about the peak and valley technique. And $199, it's not going to buy you much in terms of plugins or gear, but investing that money in yourself will improve your mixes and make mixing way more enjoyable. That is the number one advice I give anyone learning to mix. It's don't spend all your money on gear. Spend your money on getting better with the gear that you have. Spend your money investing in yourself. But what if you join and it doesn't work out? We do have a 1-year guarantee. Give the program a try. If you don't see an improvement in the quality of your music, or if you just don't have time to really get through it, you've got a whole year to request to request a refund. So this is the URL one more time, musicianonamission.com/compression breakthrough. Just go to that link. It will tell you where to go from there. So we are going to stop here. First off, I'm so unbelievably thankful that you have all made it this far. Seriously. Thank you so much. I'm just humbled that I'm able to teach everyone just to make better music at home. For so long, my whole goal has just been be the person that I needed whenever I was learning. So it just makes me so dang happy to be able to do this. We are going to be doing a Q&A now. I'm going to answer some of your questions. So feel free, the floodgates are open. Put in some of your questions. It could be about the compression course. It can be about just compression in general. I'd love to answer some of them. And we will go from there. Okay, let's find a question to start with. So here's a good question. In what situations would you use a slow attack and a fast release? So that is actually another style of compression that we go over in the compression breakthrough course. It's actually known as the groove style of compression. I'll be candid, it's my favorite style of compression. I really love it. We unfortunately just didn't have enough time in this webinar to teach it. But if you ever hear any track and you are just fully bobbing your head, you are into it, it's probably because, well, A, the performance, and B, they used a lot of groove style compression. So that's something that we've got whole lessons on in this course. So let's find another question. So here's another question for you. This is from Smelga. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Would you use tonal would you use tonal compression for vocals? Yeah. Oh, I absolutely would use tonal compression for vocals. Now, again, I would use consistency style first. Like I'd level out my macro dynamics. And then after that, I would punch it up a little bit, maybe if I felt like it needed it, or thicken it a little bit if I felt, like it needed it. Again, you can put that directly on the track if you want, or you can put it on a parallel track and mix it in subtly so that you can get more aggressive compression, but not actually wreck the tone of your sound. Okay, so I've got another question for you. Looks like this one is from Tragedy Awaits Us. What is the point of the auto button for the release that's next to the compressor? So a lot of compressors have this function that is known as auto release. You might have a compressor that has it. If you've got Logic, it comes stock. Now, what that is, it's basically an intelligent release. You are giving the compressor full reign over actually setting the release time, and the release time changes with the music. It's basically doing what is known as program dependence. If you ever see any sort of review on a compressor and they say it's a program dependent compressor, that means that it has an auto release. So basically, if something is super long, it tends to elongate the release time. If the notes are very fast, it tends to make the release time shorter. It's really, really useful for leveling. If you're trying to level out your macro dynamics, it's great. If you're trying to get tonal compression, usually not so great. Unless you're doing, punchy style, that's okay, because usually the auto sound tends to add more release time. So it's never a bad idea to put it on. Like when in doubt, I would use it. But if I'm trying to get tonal, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm getting either my peaks louder or my valleys louder, probably wouldn't use it. Okay, so we've got a question from Bruce Knox asking, can you briefly explain knee? Yeah, so basically what knee is, it changes the threshold from a single point into a what I like to call a fog cloud of points. So I'm so sorry. Hold on one moment. There's yelling outside my house. Huh. Weird. Excuse me. So if I had a threshold of 10 decibels and my volume got to 10.5 decibels and didn't quite get there, the compressor would not kick on. But if If I had a little bit of a knee, then I am basically turning that single point to a range of points. So if my track got to like 11 dBs, then the compressor actually would turn on, excuse me. But it would turn on at a much lower ratio. So it gives you like a fog cloud of a threshold, but the lower you are in that cloud, the higher ratio is. The higher you are in that cloud, the more aggressive the ratio is. So it's something that's very, very useful if you're trying to get more gradual compression. It makes it less accurate, but sometimes more musical. Okay, let's find another question. Okay, so Seth Hillary Jackson asks, does the course cover multi-band compression? Yes, it does. So multi-band compression, it's definitely an important part of compression. I might make the argument that it is not as important as a lot of YouTube videos tell you it is, but that is definitely something that we go into in the course, just so that you learn what it is, when to use it, how to use it. Let's find another question. So Mike asks, how is this different than the program offered by the Recording Revolution? Graham. I love Graham. He's great. I'm pretty sure they don't have a dedicated compression course. Now, I could be wrong. I have not checked in a while, but I'm pretty sure the Recording Revolution does not have a dedicated compression course. So as far as how it's different, it exists. That sounds way more harsh than I meant it. I actually love Graham. Graham's great. He's one of my favorite teachers on the market right now. So G. Stoddard, or Guy Stoddard, again, so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your names. Will there be specifics for R&B and urban in the course? So there is a section of the course that goes over differences in compression in different genres. It's actually one of my favorite videos in the entire course, because it kind of goes in and talks about how certain genres are more aggressive with certain parts of compression, and other genres are more aggressive with other parts of compression. So the stuff you learn throughout the course applies to R&B and urban, but that course is going to kind of just direct you a little bit towards like, here's what you might want to focus on. Oh my goodness. So I just checked out the sales page. I'm so thankful. It looks like a lot of you have already been purchasing. I want to do a few shout outs just to say thank you so much. Jeremy Zadel, Jeff Boehm, Oriel Padros, G. Stoddard, Reggie's McNicholas. Again, I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing these. So dang American. I hate that I can't pronounce names outside of my own state. Thank you all so much for purchasing this. I really genuinely think that this is going to help you get radio ready mixes. Here's a few other people who have purchased. Connor Connolly, thank you so much. Roger Fulton. Oh my goodness, there's so many. Robert Trasmuth, Lars Gulitz, Brian Barnhart, Mark L. Porter. Thank you all so much. I am just feel so blessed for this, and I'm so excited for you to be able to actually experience this. So let's check out another question. So this is from The Secret C. What about VLA compressors where there's no compression knob, no attack, and no release, just an input knob and peak reduction? So I think you're referring to opto compressors. So an opto compressor is like an LA2A, which is a super famous compressor. We do cover different kinds of analog compressors because most digital compressors are based on the VCA style of compression, which has all the bells and whistles that we're used to, whereas other analog compressors have less. Like, for example, the LA2A, which has, as he said, basically gain and a threshold knob. And that compressor is program dependent. So the attack and release are entirely decided in the box, which is part of the reason why it's so good for leveling out a sound, is because the compressor is decided what to turn down and what to keep loud. Okay, here's another question. This is from Chris Frick. I do EDM in the box with no analog gear. So I only like, hold on, I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. To do the 8-hour course. So I'd only, I see what this is saying. So I'd only like to have the 8-hour course. So because he does EDM in the box, he only really needs compression breakthrough rather than all of the bonuses. Is this available to pay for alone? So the normal course, whenever we launched it several months ago, it was $199 anyway. So you will still get all of the bonuses. You cannot buy compression breakthrough by itself, but functionally you are buying compression breakthrough by itself, and we are giving you a few bonuses just to make it easier to learn all of this stuff. Plus, I really do think, you'll get a lot out of the in-depth feedback in the studio sessions. You just learn a lot from stuff like that, even though they're not really covering compression specifically. Okay, we've got a question from Nicholas Seliman. What attack and release settings do you usually use when you do parallel compression? I'll use either punchy style compression or thickness style compression. So it just totally depends on what I am trying to do. Like, am I trying to make it thicker or am I trying to make it punchier? Those are the settings I'll use. I don't change it up because it is in parallel. I'll usually just make it more aggressive. So I'll just turn the ratio higher. Like, I won't really change anything else, but I'll just have a much higher ratio. Okay, we have another question from Regis McNicholas. How important is the quality of your compressor? It's a bit of a hard question to answer because stock compressors that are coming with DAWs are just getting better and better and better every single year. The Logic Pro compressor, for example, I used that for so long before I ever upgraded to a super nice compressor. So you can hear me say this now. Your gear does not matter as much as you think it does. What matters is you being good at using your gear. Now, having, high quality compressors, does it help? Yeah, for sure. I have a whole lot of really nice compressors and I use all of them in a mix and whatever. But ultimately, 10% of the quality of my compression comes from using high quality compressors. 90% of the quality of my compression comes from me knowing how to compress and me compressing with intention. So no, you do not have to have high quality compressors. Will they help? Yes. Are they a necessity? No. I would much rather you practice and get good at what you have and then go spend money on that than spend money on it now and be confused why your sound isn't instantly better. Okay. We've got another question from Rom. I have seen mixers that set the attack at its highest and the release at its lowest rate for huge, let's say, snare sounds. Would this be too extreme? I assume that you're saying, so when you're saying highest, I assume you mean fastest. And when you're saying lowest, I assume you mean slowest. That is basically going to give you consistency style of compression. It's kind of what we were talking about earlier on. It's not necessarily going to give you a quote unquote huge sound, but it will give you a more leveled sound, which functionally could end up sounding super big because you have certain for example, snare hits that don't get so quiet in the mix that they're lost. So every snare sounds pretty much where it needs to sound. So yeah, you could say that that makes it bigger for sure. Okay, let's find another one. Okay, so excuse me. Seth Hillary Jackson's got a question. My stock compressor has a hold function in addition to attack and release. What would I use that for? So that's something that we do go over in the course. Hold is something you usually see it more on other dynamic processors like a noise gate, for example, where it's basically just saying, rather than the attack happening and then the release happening, there's 3 stages. There's the attack, there's the hold, then there's the release. And so if the sound goes beneath the threshold, usually the release would kick on and it would slowly bring it to where there was no more gain reduction happening, right? Whereas with hold, the gain reduction would stay constant for some amount of time, and then it would slowly get rid of that gain reduction. It is useful, getting maybe a more natural sound to your compression. Is it necessary? No, but if you got it, practice with it. Sometimes just a little bit of hold can add sort of like that extra oomph to getting the sound that you're looking for. Okay, so hold on one moment. Let's find another one. Okay, so Nick Bradford has got a question. So would these types of compression on the individual tracks, would you use these types of compression on the individual tracks or on a group or bus? And if so, which? So I tend to use only consistency style compression on the individual tracks. And then for my groups or my buses, then I'll start to add sort of my more tonal stuff, like my punchy style compression, my thickness style compression, my groove style compression. I tend to focus more on affecting the macro dynamics on the individual tracks to level them out, and then focusing a little bit more on gluing stuff together and changing the tone on my buses. Okay, so, oh my God. So I'm looking at the sales page again. I've got some more people to shout out. We have so many people who are getting in on this. I'm so excited. Oh my goodness. Let me shout a few of you out. David Morgan, Tom Seebach, Robert Gifford, Michael Wiedmer, John Farrell, Michael O'Brow, Chris Frick, Thomas Ward, Amit Iraz. Y'all, I am so thankful. This is incredible. You guys are going to truly learn how to do compression with intention for the first time. It's going to be a breakthrough for you. I'm so excited to hear your feedback and hear if it helped. So let's keep rolling with these questions. Okay, so we have a question from Mari Dennis. I have difficulty hearing the difference when I'm using a compressor, like when I'm tweaking the knobs. How do I get better at it? So this is something that we talk a lot about in the course. And it's actually part of the reason why learning compression is so difficult if you don't have a system. Because one of the rules of thumb to overcompression is if you can hear the compression, it's probably too much compression. Which that makes it really difficult to do compression without a system, because if the rule of thumb is if you can hear it, it's too much, well, how do you hear it? How do you know if you're doing it right? There are things to do. the thing that I did earlier whenever I was teaching all of you how to set up your compressor, where the threshold was super high and the attack and release were super fast and the ratio is super high, that is a great way to hear what the compressor is doing, because all of your settings are so extreme that it forces you to understand exactly what is happening while you're tweaking the knobs. That is, for me, my biggest trick, is making sure that I have set up my compressor first, and then I start actually trying to get my compression. And usually as I am tweaking the knobs, I know that it's sounding way too aggressive, it's sounding way too harsh, but by the time I get to the end of actually setting up the compressor, it's sounding and feeling, more importantly, the way I want it to. Okay, let's find another one. Okay, so we have a question from Jason Hassai. So besides FabFilter, are there any other compressors that provide even more insightful visualization for what's happening with compression as shown in the visualizer, or is FabFilter the best? There probably are. I don't know any off of the top of my head. FabFilter is really the only one. I do not want to go on record and say that FabFilter is the only one, because I know people in the comments will probably say there's this one and this one and this one and this one. But for me, FabFilter has been the one that has been the most useful visually while also having the best sound. So if you're looking for something with visual feedback like that, that might be the one to go for. Okay, let's find another question. This is from Amy. Let me make sure I'm pronouncing this right. This is from Amy Oriza. Do you explain how different compressors can help in different areas? Oh yeah, definitely. A lot of this course is going over just where and when to use compression. And also when not to use compression. So often people overuse compression because they think that every single instrument has to be compressed as much as it can. And that's something that is it's a bit of a calling card for an amateur. So you absolutely learn when to use it, how to use it, why to use it, and when not to use it. It's definitely something that, for me at least, was the most helpful to figure out, which is just like, when should I use it? When should I not use it? How to not use it too much, and also how not to use it too little. There is a balance when it comes to balancing the dynamic range of your mix, and you're just trying to find that balance. Okay, so let's keep on rolling with some different questions. So Ricardo Luis Trevino has a question. It says, do different preamps have embedded compression? I've heard that from vintage or tube ones at certain levels. Aha! Yes, they do. You're actually getting on to some of my insider information that I go into in this course. Whenever I talk about analoging your mix, making your mix, your tracks sound like they came from an analog studio, part of the reason that is so beneficial, part of the reason that tracks that come from an analog studio sound so good and are so much easier to mix, that's a key point, easier to mix, is because every piece of analog gear adds a very small amount of saturation. And saturation is basically additive distortion plus destructive compression. It's basically thickness style compression, fast attack, fast release. It's very subtle, so it's only decreasing our dynamic range by just a little bit. But whenever you are layering it, so it's running from the microphone to the preamp, and that's doing one, and then to the board, and that's doing one, and then it's running to the tape machine, and that's doing one, and then it's running to the mixing board, and that's doing one, and then it's running to the blah 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 blah. Layer. That ends up decreasing the dynamic range quite a bit. and it ends up making the tracks a lot easier to handle in the mix itself, while not making them sound lifeless, because saturation adds a little bit of that additive distortion. It adds more frequency content, which kind of helps keep it musical without actually making it sound lifeless. Okay, let's find some more questions. Okay, so here's a question from Lloyd Butler. That's pretty good. For MIDI piano samples, should I use a compressor or should I limit the velocity? I assuming when you're saying samples that you're just talking about like MIDI notes with different velocities. You can do both. I tend to use tonal compression on my my synths and my software instruments, because I'm trying to change up those micro dynamics. I'm trying to get I'm trying to make it punchier or thicker. For just leveling it out for consistency, that I would really just want to go in with a fine-tooth comb and turn up, particularly quiet notes with your velocity, or turn down particularly loud notes with your velocity. It's just going to be a lot more accurate that way. It's going to be a lot more musical that way. It's not really necessary to add all of this extra stuff on top of it when you can do what no other recorded media can do, which is go in and change the performance. So I'd recommend that. You should do tonal. You probably shouldn't do consistency. So let's check out our sales page one more time. It's just growing and growing. I want to shout out a few more people. Wayne Wright, thank you so much. Cedric Crawford Jr., Mary Ann Hyman, Barry Reynolds, Justice Boykers, David Campbell, Rupert Gibson, Thomas Sushanek. Thank you all so much. I'm so excited to lead you through basically just getting pro level mixes with your dynamics. I really do think that this is going to be so helpful for you. All right, let's keep rolling on this Q&A. So we've got a question from Steve Bauer. Do you cover when to tweak levels versus compression? Yes, I absolutely do. Especially with melodic instruments, like your vocals, for example. It is so important to do not only compression, but both gain automation and volume automation. That's how you get the pro sound. We do go over that in different sections of the course, how important it is, how compression is not a substitute for good volume automation. You gotta have it. Compression just either changes the tone in a way that volume automation never could, or it levels the performance out so that you don't have to go out again with a fine-tooth comb and very specifically turn stuff up and turn stuff down. You're able to use it to turn up phrases and turn down phrases, or maybe like a rogue note or two, rather than having to basically automate every single note in a melody. Okay, so we've got a question from Thunder Grove Music. I'm a user of Mo2DP, and my DAW looks very different from yours. Would this course work in other DAWs? Absolutely, it will. These are techniques that would work in any DAW you have. Literally every single DAW that I could think of as I was making this course, these techniques will work in that DAW. They'll also work if you work in a studio. Like if you're just doing analog work in a studio, with the exception of gain automation, unless you are prepping your tracks, every single thing we go over is something that you can do in your studio as well. So every DAW, it's not really going to be dependent on the DAW, honestly. It's going to be dependent on just the compressor and learning how to use that tool. Um, oh, this is a fun one. So Wijikmeister has a question and says, I wonder, you didn't have these kinds of tutorials and such. So where and how did you learn it? Um, oh, okay. I'm gonna laugh at myself for a minute. So my whole thing with teaching, like the reason I do this, I really truly mean this. The whole reason I teach is because I want to be the person that I wish that I had when I was new at this, or even when I was an intermediate at this, because I learned just so much bad advice from so many different places on the internet and going to college for it and stuff like that. And so my whole thing is to create a system, systematize things that are really, really vague for people so that they can understand step by step what the workflow is to actually get to a professional sound. So as far as how I figured it out, I went into, oh my God, I think like 3 or 4 months of research doing this. I already was doing this in all of my mixes, but as far as the system of it, which you'll learn once you get there, the system was something that like I had to create. I had to synthesize it from like all of the different ways that I used a compressor. And I literally, in order to do this, I had to figure out more what was going on behind the hood of a compressor. I literally brought in a friend of mine who's a PhD in calculus to sit down and like look at some of the algorithms and like look at what was happening on like volume graphs with all of these compressors to figure out exactly what I could do to systemize something that is unsystemizable. And obviously we've been able to do that. That is a very fun memory in my brain. I still am laughing that like it came to that, but it did, and it helped out quite a bit. So that's how. And also just through practice, lots and lots and lots and lots of practice and lots of trial and error. Okay, so Desert Man 60 has a question. Can you use a compressor on a MIDI track before converting it to audio? Yeah, you absolutely can. I wouldn't do it. Actually, I would do it. It doesn't matter. All that matters is, does that work in your workflow? If you are wanting to compress pre-tape, go for it. Like, you're wanting to compress it before you actually go to mixing, because I assume that's why you're bouncing out your synths for audio. Go for it. I don't do that a ton, but that's because it doesn't really work in my workflow. I do more, I tend to leave the compression pre-tape more for analog saturation and a little bit less for like actual compression. But a lot of people love doing that. So you absolutely can go for that. Okay, let's find another one. Hold on just a moment, everybody. I'm having some some refresh issues, just trying to refresh the page so that I can see more of the chat. Just a lot of people are commenting, so we want to make sure that I'm seeing some of the newer comments. So it looks like we've actually sort of, I think we've gotten to the end of our questions. So let's just, let's keep on rolling. If you've stuck with us to the end of this webinar, then I know that you care about your music and you're clearly willing to invest time and energy into your own skills. So I encourage you to take action. So this is the last chance to claim this offer. Go to this URL. You can get access, musicianonamission.com/compression breakthrough. If you are on the page by the time this webinar ends, it's not going to go away. But if you try to go to this URL in 20 minutes, it's going to be gone. It's going to be, we are going to turn off access to it. This is only going to be around for this webinar. So this is the place to go. Oh, excuse me. Let me add that one more time. This is the URL to go. I just want to thank all of you so much for investing your time into this. I really, really hope that this has helped you out. Again, this for me is something that I just wish that I had whenever I was learning how to mix and whenever I was learning how to make music. And so I just want to pass this knowledge on to you so that you can go out there and make radio-ready songs and create regardless. So this has been Dylan Pines with Musician on a Mission. I think that we are going to end it here. Thank you all, so much. And I will see all of you very, very soon. Goodbye.